failed to extinguish Barack's rising star.
You were so close, my darling. Alas, no cigar.
And now their tune is changing.
I'll be back in 4 years, heck, it ain't all that far.
Oh, it's time for some campaign.
Today's video is going to be a lazy video. If you follow me on Twitter, you know I did a massive thread on this a couple weeks ago, but it still sticks in my junk and I need to elaborate on some areas, I feel like. It's also lazy in that I'm not going to be redoing all the graphics, because me being me, I didn't save any of them. Not that they're particularly complicated to recreate, but fuck it. I'll just narrate some of the addendums to you because I want to get this out before Super Tuesday. So strap in and strap on. Today's about power theory and how coalitions do battle. Also some RTS references.
Golly, it looks like we're in the middle of a war between hot dog buns and cats.
This video is primarily targeted towards the Bernie Sanders conversation right now. It could apply to Warren, or any of the candidates really, but either way, it definitely applies to Trump, so whoever ultimately wins the nomination will have to find a way to fight it. So take a good hard look at these numbers. These are some of the results from the last few presidential elections in Michigan. I'm choosing Michigan for 3 reasons. First, it's in the Rust Belt. The voters were told Bernie can't win. Middle America, as it were. Second, Michigan just became a swing state. Admittedly, that was because Hillary Clinton completely ignored it, taking their loyalty for granted. But like it or not, they went red last election by a narrow margin, which theoretically would make it more reflective of the national discourse, which is the whole reason we put so much emphasis on swing states, especially combined with that Rust Belt point. And third, and most importantly, Michigan was the only state to lose population in the 2010 census, about 55,000. So they have a stable voter base that any increase in raw numbers can't be dismissed to population growth. The electorate actually shrank for a good period in these years. So if one year has a 10% increased voter turnout, it's not because an extra 100,000 people are here in 2004 that weren't here in 2000. So let's do some takeaways from this data based purely on the numbers. Strap in. The first thing to notice is the differences in party loyalty. The Republican turnout in raw voters is. They range from Bush's low of 1.95 mil to Bush's high of 2.31 mil. So one, it's interesting to note that Bush has the high in this 20-year period, despite the fact he lost the state. The Democrats are far more volatile. The low sits at 2.17 mil, Gore's election, and the high rests in 2008 with Obama's 2.87 million. Again, Michigan lost population during this period, which makes the dramatic shift all the more striking. Let's look at the 2 previous elections, which I'm taking the liberty to sort by party. This puts Trump at plus 164,287 voters over his predecessor Romney, but still behind Bush in 2004. Clinton is short 295,730 to Barack Obama. Some try to say that Sanders can't win a fight in a general election because moderates and centrists won't stand by for him and turn Trump. But even if we assume all of Trump's extra support over Romney were former Obama voters, that there were exactly 0 first-time voters, which is a ridiculous supposition, but let's pretend, that would still leave us missing 131,443 voters who voted for Obama but didn't vote for Clinton. Now, hypothetically, it's possible that these 100,000 plus voters left the state in those 8 years, although data suggests that Michigan has had a slight population increase for this coming census, but it is possible. But that would also be nearly triple the number lost between 2000 and 2010 in just 4 years, roughly 7 times the rate of loss. Statistically, that seems unlikely. The logical conclusion to draw, then, is that if we presuppose that voters in swing state country are more likely to vote for a Democrat based on how moderate they are, we must also assume that 164K is a larger number than 295K. After some very rigorous testing, I don't want to be definitive on this in case I end up looking like an ass later, but my math would indicate that 295,000 is the larger number. Don't quote me on that. I don't have any hard data to back that up, just my own conjecture. But the far more likely explanation is that those voters simply stayed home compared to Obama's all-time high of 2.87 million. Because again, the Republican numbers are very consistent. The mean Republican vote is 2,139,924 after rounding out that piece of a voter, meaning the deviation is about 8.6%. That is a steady, very consistent base of support. As long as they put forth some effort, or at least similar efforts in Michigan as they have in years past, any Republican can reasonably expect 2 million votes no matter what. The question for them is finding that little bit extra. Democrats' math, again, highlights how wild and moody their base is. Their mean turnout is 2,471,118. Again, rounding for those body parts and the trash bags, which gives them a 12% swing in either direction. If campaigning towards the center is the best way to win, then this should be the opposite way around. As the swing voters sway to and fro between elections, it would be the reverse, not equal, because as a proportion of their base, those back and forth votes would be a larger percent of the Republicans who have a smaller mean. But that isn't what the numbers are pointing towards. They are speaking to a trend that absolutely isn't about moderation.
What in the wide world of sports is going on here? I had you people try to get a little track lead, not to jump around like a bunch of Kansas City
Okay, I hope all the math hasn't put you to sleep. I am just trying to demonstrate to you, with math, that the Republican base of support is far stronger and more reliable than the Democrats' base in the state of Michigan, which, as we said way back at the beginning, is a very good indicator of where people who insist Democrats can't move further to the left would point to and say, places like that. Far more practical an explanation is that voters, especially on the Democrat side, lack engagement. A barrier that was broken by Barack Obama. To reiterate, Michigan is one of those all-important Rust Belt blue-collar states that, so we are told, Sanders can't win. You've probably seen this chart in a civics class, or an approximation of it at least, which is supposed to represent the parties and the moderate middle in a two-party system. The voters to the margins are presumed to be unengaged. Fuck this chart. I propose that you instead look at this chart as a way to understand the electorate. This is where my laziness is affecting our video quality here, but I just spent 2 hours punching numbers into a calculator, so fuck it. On reflection, I realized this should have made the blue and red sides poke out around the center, and the purple section should fan out like an hourglass to be a better projection of the electorate. But like I said, you aren't here for production value, and if you are you lost? Think of the colors here as people who are predominantly left and right. They're much larger swaths here than the bar chart because, surveys show, people like to claim independence and then vote straight ticket, or they are ideologically indistinct from a partisan of either party. Now, think of the star as the center of power. The closer you exist to the star, the more power you have. In our culture, billionaires are on top of the star. Which is where those bulges would come in here, because while people have ideological differences, they have far more in common with people closer to them than apart, which the bar chart does not show. Thus, this chart defines the electorate by both ideology, conservative, progressive, or moderate, and their distance from power. In a word, marginalization. This is obviously something of a Mercator projection. The real circle would probably be a sphere, and the lines wouldn't be so clearly blended, and they certainly wouldn't be symmetrical, but this is just for brevity, as I am telling you to replace this in a 6th grade textbook for that other bad chart. So under that, guys, this would be a rough projection of the 2012 election. The overlap of these campaigns are the moderates who are being fought over, and no campaign would ever cut out that star completely. No, not even Sanders. And again, these circles are for simplicity. The real shape of these coalitions would look more like the Nickelodeon GAC icon, with tendrils and pockets trying to wrap up endorsements and constituencies. A tiny little arm reaching out to grab all female gun owners, for example. So now is the really nerdy part. Think of a game like Civilization or Starcraft, and think about your resource allocation. Is it better to expand into empty areas and gather resources to fund your empire, or is it better to throw your money at the opponent you share a border with in an expensive war of attrition while there are unclaimed gold mines right on your border? Effectively, that's what we saw in 2016, was Trump adopting the former strategy and Clinton adopting the latter. Trump pushed into virgin territory by openly courting white supremacists and the Russian intelligence service, by throwing away dog whistles and promising them everything talk radio told them that they wanted. I should also note that both circles would have massive holes in their campaigns here, as they were the most hated candidates of all time. Meanwhile, Clinton, first, took Michigan's loyalty for granted. She also, basically, ran the same campaign as she did against Barack Obama. He is a pink-faced newbie, and I am the elite pro. These spheres of contention would also explain how Clinton lost to Obama in 2008, because these aren't just measuring how the parties fight each other, they also measure how parties fight internally. Now, in a multi-party system, the big gaps in the electorate here that go completely unfilled would be filled by smaller parties, like the Lib Dems and the Greens in the UK, for instance. But because of the US's nature as a two-party system, those voter markets, so to speak, remain untapped. Engagement can build a winning coalition in the US. Just because Trump did it doesn't mean the tool itself is evil. And if you want him out of office, someone needs to address this deficiency in the base. Let's go back to our video game metaphor. These uncontested spaces represent your home base, the stuff that is so safe you don't need to guard it with units or defensive towers or city walls. These are your heartland territories, pumping out all your science and gold and food and military production to fight the war that's in the contest areas in the middle. Let's say these are the areas in striking range of the AI. The cities in this territory are the ones constantly being nuked by Gandhi and pumping out just enough production to repair the walls just before the next turn of combat. They're the gold sink. You need your base to prop up the front line. Without it, the front line collapses pretty easily. Likewise, if you want to displace Trump, you need to find a roughly equal-sized base area from which you can outspend his resources. There are points where it's better to dig in and fight, but one of the weaknesses of playing tall, like the Clinton campaign, is that if you lose any ground, you've been crippled and you might not recover. Alright, enough of the 4X metaphor. Do you think that Donald Trump has a meticulous, well-thought-out strategy for any of his stupid ideas? Do you think he's mathed out all the costs of his expansive government program? Do you think he's considered the geopolitical stability of the Northern Triangle? Do you think he can name a single country in the Northern Triangle if you asked him? Of course not. He just spouted off the shit he wants his coalition to be about. Primarily, fuck the Mexicans. And he lets his thousands, literally thousands of sycophants do the legwork online and in the news. In 1988, around 200 political scientists signed a letter about the worrying trend they saw in the American media in the presidential election that year. They were concerned that far too much time was being spent talking about polling data and who was ahead of who where. They did some math and calculated that the distressing amount of political news spent only discussing the results of polls was 12%. That was 1988. So far in the 2020 campaign, almost 60% of the news about the election is about polls, not fact-checking, not civics discourse, not analyzing implications and holding candidates' feet to the fire, just who's going to be prom queen. And that is how Trump played the media. Now, I don't know if this is a skill he picked up as a celebrity or if it's just blind luck that he stumbled into it. Could be either, but Trump swung into a campaign where the media did not exist except to tell people who all the cool kids are voting for. He did that by squirting out his dumb ideas into a microphone and letting his base build it all for him. This uncontested zone, where there's no overlap, that's where the Dershowitzes and the Carlsons, the hacks, live. But also a couple of academics. Trump can say something completely stupid, like, hey, a Supreme Court justice wrote a dissenting opinion against me. She should recuse herself from all further cases involving the federal government. Within hours, there will be dozens of opinion pieces on why this is a good thing, actually. And from that swath of human fecal release, 1 or 2 defenses will really click with someone, some group, out here in the margins will hear that convoluted ex post facto argument, and it will stick in the national discourse, allowing the conversation to slide further to the right. And if these people in the circle feel it is their first time in that circle, they will honk those blowhorns all the louder. Look at how relatively successful Andrew Yang's campaign was. His circle was tiny, but completely uncontested. The Yang Gang was annoying, but they put in work for the man. He managed to make the idea of UBI visible on the American political margin with his very small, but completely secure base. Now, personally, I am still pulling for Warren. I don't even know if she'll make it to Wednesday at this point. I won't rehash my Q&A video on why I think she's the better president material, but you certainly can't convince me that Sanders doesn't have the circle to win against Trump. This is why I made this video in a few sentences. To me, the Democrats, whether you call them establishment or moderate or realist, who insist on running this election like it's 1988, still are basically the senators who want to stab Caesar. Okay, you got rid of the tyrant. Now what? How do you put the genie back in the bottle? Because, like these purple Dems, those ancient Republicans didn't have a plan. They just thought if you removed the bad man, the good old days would come rushing back in, without addressing the gross inequalities of power that brought the bad man in the first place. If you want the system to stay in place, and believe me, I want the Constitution to stay in place, you need to adjust the dynamic of power to secure it. There is a time and a place to confront the opposition, but if you don't have a counterweight to absorb the shock of his blows, hoping that without a fallback point, you can survive the ups and downs of a campaign, you lose, full stop. Hillary was destroyed by a simple effect of bad timing. The Comey announcement very likely sank her. It's impossible to prove, of course, but did 1,500 people in Pennsylvania stay home because, for them, it was just the last straw in a string of corruption? Maybe. That number certainly seems plausible in a state of millions. I know that I personally voted against Trump, not for Clinton. She wasn't selling anything I was buying. By contrast, look at how Trump has managed to weasel around the office of president with nothing but his base. The moderates in government keep resigning and abandoning him. Fuck it. He'll fill it with his lapdogs like Bill Barr. I would scream at the Democrats to please stop pretending that this isn't a post-Trump world. If you can't adapt, you go extinct, and you need to not be afraid of the dynamics of power. You don't have to be ruthless, but some ruth won't kill you. It would, in point of fact, save you. Don't take for granted anyone to the left is on your side. And stop assuming that anyone to the right can't be stolen from the enemy circle. Everyone has weak spots, even the coalition of the deplorables.
From both far and near, for a ritual we practice every 4 years, when we promise you anything you wanna hear to win the proud tradition. We spend billions of dollars